When John D. Rockefeller died in 1937, the world expected the end of an era. The empire of oil he had built, Standard Oil, had already been broken apart by the U.S. government. But power doesn't disappear when a man dies. It simply changes shape. For the Rockefellers, the next generation wouldn't build refineries or drill new wells. They would build something far more enduring: influence. At the time of his death, Rockefeller was worth the equivalent of hundreds of billions today. But his children had learned a lesson deeper than profit: that money loses its value if it doesn't shape the world that comes after you. John D. Rockefeller Jr., his only son, was quiet, cautious, and deeply religious, almost the opposite of his father. He believed the family's name could only survive through moral repair, and so he transformed business power into something that looked almost pure: philanthropy. He poured money into universities, museums, and churches. He restored colonial Williamsburg. He built Rockefeller Center in New York City, not just as real estate, but as a symbol of legitimacy. The message was clear. The Rockefellers were no longer just oil barons. They were now patrons of civilization. But legitimacy has its own price. By the mid-20th century, John D. Jr.'s sons, especially Nelson, David, and Lawrence, began to see philanthropy not as redemption, but as a form of soft power. Nelson Rockefeller entered politics. David Rockefeller, the youngest, entered banking, soon to become the chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank. Lawrence moved quietly behind the scenes, investing in airlines, conservation, and the early environmental movement. Together they extended their family's reach into finance, policy, and ideology. The world no longer called them monopolists. Now they were visionaries. That shift was perhaps their greatest achievement. David Rockefeller understood something his grandfather had only glimpsed: that in the new century, control over money flows mattered more than control over oil fields. Under his watch, Chase Manhattan became the global bank of the American empire, funding projects across Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. Where Standard Oil once drilled, Chase Manhattan now lent, and with every loan came political leverage. David didn't seek headlines. He preferred private meetings with presidents, kings, and ministers. He was a banker who moved like a diplomat, shaping economic policy through conversation rather than competition. When he spoke, entire currencies moved. Meanwhile, the family's name spread through institutions rather than companies. The Rockefeller Foundation funded research that led to medical breakthroughs, public health programs, and, controversially, population control initiatives. To some, it was the purest form of giving. To others, it was influence disguised as generosity. By the 1970s, the Rockefeller network had become a quiet web linking governments, banks, universities, and charities, a kind of invisible infrastructure of the modern world. Oil had created their fortune, but structure kept their power alive. The story of the Rockefellers after John D. is not a story of greed or redemption alone. It is the story of transformation, from visible empire to invisible architecture. When people think the Rockefellers disappeared, they're only looking in the wrong direction. They no longer build refineries. They build frameworks, policies, programs, partnerships. They operate in boardrooms, not oil fields, and in that shift lies the real legacy of John D. To create something so vast that even when it ends, it continues to rule. Because true power doesn't need to be seen, it only needs to be inherited.